Far north, beyond the familiar cities and highways, lies a stretch of Alaska where rivers carve through mountains, glaciers loom like frozen giants, and forests hide secrets older than any map. This is a place where seasoned pilots, experienced hikers, and even the most prepared adventurers have vanished without a trace. From the skies over the Gulf of Alaska to the dense wilderness near Nenana, the region has earned a chilling reputation, Alaska's own Bermuda Triangle. Here, nature's power meets the unexplained, and the line between reality and mystery grows thin. This video will take you deep into the chilling stories of those who vanished, revealing strange events, unanswered questions, and eerie patterns that continue to baffle investigators and haunt the wilds of the last frontier. Vanished without a trace, the mystery of Hale Boggs and Nick Begich. The morning of October 16, 1972 began like any other in Anchorage, Alaska. Yet, by evening, it would mark one of the most baffling disappearances in American political history. House Majority Leader Hale Boggs of Louisiana and Alaska Representative Nick Begich boarded a twin-engine Cessna 310, accompanied by Begich's aide, Russell Brown, and pilot Don Johns. Their destination was Juneau, where they planned to attend a campaign fundraiser. The weather was challenging, with reports of poor visibility and turbulent conditions along the route. Despite these warnings, the small aircraft took off from Anchorage's Merrill Field at approximately 9:00 a.m. As the plane made its way southward, it was expected to follow a route over the Gulf of Alaska. However, shortly after takeoff, air traffic controllers lost contact with the aircraft. Several local fishermen reported seeing a small aircraft struggling in low clouds near the Turnagain Arm, though their accounts could not be verified. No distress signals were received, and the plane failed to arrive in Juneau as scheduled. The absence of any communication or emergency alerts left authorities with no clues about the aircraft's fate. Some investigators later noted that the Cessna's flight plan was unusually direct, possibly exposing it to the worst of the weather without room for detours. The disappearance prompted an immediate and extensive search operation. Over 39 days, more than 600 hours of aerial and ground searches were conducted by the U.S. Coast Guard, Navy, Army, Air Force, Civil Air Patrol, and civilian volunteers. The search covered approximately 325 square miles of rugged terrain, including dense forests and mountainous regions. In addition to official searches, volunteers in small boats combed the shoreline, hoping to spot any debris that might have drifted from the plane. Despite these efforts, no wreckage or signs of the missing plane were found. The lack of an emergency locator transmitter (ELT) on the aircraft further complicated the search. At the time, ELTs were not mandatory for small aircraft, and the Cessna 310 did not have one. This absence hindered rescue operations, as ELT are designed to emit signals that can be detected by search teams. The National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, later reported that a portable ELT, which could have been used in place of a fixed one, was found in a Fairbanks aircraft. Additionally, a witness claimed to have seen an object resembling an ELT in the pilot's briefcase, but it was never confirmed if it was functional or if it had been aboard the missing plane. As weeks turned into months, the search efforts dwindled, and on November 24, 1972, the official search was suspended. The 4 men aboard the Cessna were declared legally dead on December 29, 1972. Their bodies and the wreckage of the aircraft were never recovered, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions. The disappearance of Boggs and Begich had significant political implications. Both men had been re-elected in the November 1972 elections, but their seats were left vacant following their presumed deaths. A special election was held in March 1973 to fill Begich's seat, which was won by Republican Don Young. Boggs's widow, Lindy Boggs, later succeeded him in Congress, serving as a representative from Louisiana. Over the years, various theories have emerged regarding the fate of the missing plane. Some suggest that the aircraft may have crashed into the Gulf of Alaska, while others propose that it could have been downed in the dense forests of the Chugach Mountains. The absence of definitive evidence has fueled speculation and intrigue, but the true cause of the disappearance remains a mystery. Despite the passage of time, the case continues to captivate the public's imagination. Documentaries, podcasts, and articles have revisited the events of that fateful day, exploring new angles and presenting fresh perspectives. The story of Hale Boggs and Nick Begich serves as a poignant reminder of the dangers faced by those who venture into the vast and unforgiving wilderness of Alaska. The Alaska Triangle, a region known for its high number of unexplained disappearances, has been the subject of much speculation. While the disappearance of Boggs and Begich occurred outside the traditionally defined boundaries of the Triangle, the case has often been associated with the area's mysterious reputation. The lack of conclusive evidence and the enduring questions surrounding the incident contribute to the region's enigmatic legacy. The wilderness that swallowed Hale Boggs and Nick Begich keeps its secrets, and no one knows what truly became of them. The 1,950 Skymaster that never landed. The wind howled across the frozen Yukon landscape, carrying the sharp sting of ice that cut through layers of clothing. Mountains rose like jagged teeth from a blanket of snow, and rivers glimmered faintly under a pale winter Sunday. It was a place where silence ruled, broken only by the occasional call of a distant bird or the faint groan of shifting ice. In this vast, frozen wilderness, even the smallest human activity felt fragile and fleeting. At Elmendorf Air Force Base in Anchorage, a Douglas C-54D Skymaster sat ready on the tarmac. 4 engines rested beneath frost-coated wings, waiting to carry 44 people across Alaska and into Canada. Among those aboard were military personnel bound for reassignment, a civilian technician eager to return home, and a young mother traveling with her child. Their presence on the aircraft seemed ordinary, yet the weight of the environment outside hinted at dangers no checklist could cover. The Skymaster lifted into the pale morning sky, engines cutting through the bitter cold. Pilots adjusted dials and gauges with practiced hands, aware of the thin margin for error over miles of unbroken wilderness. Below them stretched forests and frozen rivers, each indistinguishable from the next, and mountains that hid their peaks in low clouds. The aircraft followed the northwest staging route, a chain of remote airfields and radio stations designed to guide flights across the unforgiving northern terrain. It was a lifeline, but one that could only do so much against weather or misfortune. Somewhere over the Yukon, the crew reported conditions over Snag as manageable. Ice had begun forming on the wings, but visibility remained adequate. This check-in was the last known contact. Moments later, radio silence took hold. Eyewitnesses in remote Yukon settlements later reported hearing an aircraft engine struggling to maintain altitude, though the exact location could not be confirmed. No distress signals, no hints of trouble, and no further communications would ever reach the outside world. A small aircraft, sturdy and reliable, had seemingly vanished into the expanse of snow and rock. When the plane failed to arrive at its final destination in Great Falls, Montana, alarm spread quickly. A massive search mobilized both US and Canadian forces, more than 70 personnel, scouring an area larger than many countries. Aircraft soared over peaks and valleys, their crews peering into snow-covered forests for the faintest sign of the Skymaster. Rescue efforts pushed human endurance to the limits, yet the wilderness seemed to swallow the searchers as efficiently as it had the plane itself. The search quickly proved perilous. On January 30, a C-47 aircraft crashed in the McClintock Mountains while aiding the operation. Days later, another C-47 went down near Aishihik Lake. Even a Royal Canadian Air Force plane faltered near Snag. Each incident underscored the danger of the terrain and the cold, remote stretches that had claimed the Skymaster. Some searchers noted unusual weather patterns that day, with sudden whiteouts and shifting winds that could have easily disoriented even the most experienced pilots. All crews survived, but their near misses served as a chilling reminder that the wilderness offered no mercy. In spite of all attempts, no sign of the Sky Master or those on board was ever discovered. The official search ended weeks later, leaving families and colleagues with a void that only grew heavier with time. Maps were pored over, flight paths retraced, and theories whispered, yet the plane's fate remained suspended in the silence of the Yukon. Military investigators could offer no explanation, and decades of speculation would follow without answers. Time did little to erase the story. Researchers occasionally reported pieces of metal or fragments of debris in distant corners of the Yukon, though none could be definitively linked to the flight. In recent decades, archaeologists and drone operators have combed the terrain, hoping modern technology could reveal what was invisible to past searchers. Each expedition rekindles hope, yet the Sky Master remains elusive, a phantom among snow and rock. Initially seen as a simple lost flight, the Sky Master's disappearance grew into a symbol of human vulnerability in the face of an indifferent landscape. The passengers' lives, frozen in January 1950, remind those who hear the story that nature holds dominion over even the most prepared and capable humans. Plans, schedules, and experience offer only an illusion of safety when confronted with the vast, uncharted wilderness. Time passes, but the Sky Master is never found. Mountains rise and fall, rivers flow under ice, and snowdrifts settle in silence over the land. Yet no trace of the aircraft, no sign of the passengers, has ever returned to the world above. The Yukon keeps its secret well, and the Sky Master waits unseen beneath its frozen expanse. The survival cocoon that failed. Richard Lyman Griffiths. A mist clung to the peaks of the Wrangell Mountains, curling through the dense forests like fingers of the unknown. Rivers glittered faintly beneath sheets of ice, and snowdrifts stretched farther than the eye could see. The air carried the sharp scent of pine and wet earth, mingled with the cold bite of the early Alaskan summer. In such a place, even a single human presence could vanish without leaving a trace. It was into this wilderness that Richard Lyman Griffiths stepped, carrying a creation of his own design, a survival cocoon meant to defy the elements. Griffiths was no ordinary adventurer. He had spent years studying survival techniques and testing innovative equipment. The cocoon he crafted was a compact, insulated device designed to shield a person from wind, rain, and snow. Friends described him as meticulous and determined, someone who would not enter the wild unprepared. In the summer of 2006, he announced that he would take his cocoon into the Alaskan backcountry to evaluate its practicality. Few questioned his intentions, assuming that his experience would keep him safe. His journey began inconspicuously. A bus dropped him along the Alaska Highway, where he checked into a small lodge near the White River. He left behind some personal items, telling lodge staff he planned to head to McCarthy, near Street Elias National Park. Visitors and workers recalled him speaking eagerly of his experiment, yet no one realized how isolated he intended to become. Griffiths then ventured into the wilderness, cocoon strapped to his back, disappearing into an expanse where trails were rare and human footprints scarce. Weeks passed with no sign of him. The lodge waited, assuming a delayed return. But as days turned to months, concern grew. It was over a year before authorities were notified. Search parties combed the area, tracing paths through thick forests, glacial rivers, and snow-covered valleys. A local prospector later mentioned spotting unusual tracks near a hidden glacial stream, suggesting Griffiths may have veered far off his intended route. Aerial searches flew over the rugged terrain, their crews scanning for a hint of his presence. Despite these efforts, no trace of Griffiths or his cocoon emerged. The wilderness had reclaimed him completely, leaving behind only the faint memory of his plans. Theories about his disappearance are numerous but unverified. Some suggest he succumbed to the harsh terrain, perhaps falling into a hidden ravine or becoming lost amid shifting ice and fog. Others speculate that wildlife, sudden storms, or unforeseen natural hazards claimed him before he could test the limits of his invention. The cocoon, which represented both ingenuity and hope, may have failed in ways that are impossible to reconstruct. Every unanswered question only deepens the mystery surrounding Griffith's fate. Locals remember the unusual silence that followed. Rangers patrolling nearby trails found no evidence of his passage. Hikers and hunters reported seeing no signs of unusual activity, and the rivers and creeks reflected only the endless sky above. Those who knew him well remarked that he had always been careful, almost obsessively so, which makes his disappearance even more perplexing. It was as if the wilderness itself had swallowed him deliberately, leaving no clue for others to follow. Gradually, the story began to capture interest outside Alaska. Survival enthusiasts and researchers have speculated about how the cocoon might have worked in extreme conditions. Some have retraced his intended route, examining the glaciers, rivers, and dense forests he would have crossed. Others have studied his designs, wondering whether innovation alone can ever overcome the unpredictability of nature. Yet, despite decades of curiosity, Griffith's fate remains as inaccessible as the peaks and valleys he ventured into. The fate of Richard Lyman Griffiths remains a warning to those who follow similar paths. Even the most prepared and skilled individuals can be overcome by the sheer scale and unpredictability of the wilderness. Tools, experience, and ingenuity may delay danger, but cannot eliminate it. Griffith's story has become a symbol of ambition confronting the unknown, a reminder that some experiments are never meant to conclude with clear results. As time goes on, the forests of southeast Alaska grow ever denser, rivers slide under ice, and mountains watch in silence. The survival cocoon, a testament to human creativity, was never recovered, and somewhere in the vast wilderness, the man who dared to test it is still missing, leaving only the haunting question of what truly became of Richard Lyman Griffith. The forest keeps its secret, and the cocoon that promised protection was never found. The experienced pilot who vanished in midair, Alan Foster. The Gulf of Alaska, a vast expanse of water and sky, can be both serene and treacherous. On September 9, 2013, the sea was calm and the sky was clear, offering ideal flying conditions. Yet, in the midst of this tranquility, a seasoned pilot would disappear without a trace, leaving behind only questions and a legacy of uncertainty. Alan Gabriel Foster, 47, was no stranger to the skies. Born in Fairbanks, Alaska, he had spent his life navigating the challenging terrains of the state. He earned his private pilot's license at 16 and his commercial license at 19. Over the years, he had flown extensively across Alaska, from medevac missions in Kotzebue to commercial flights in Bethel and Dillingham. His expertise was not just in flying, he was also a certified mechanic and an aeronautical engineer, having graduated from Stanford University. Friends and colleagues described him as meticulous, reliable, and deeply passionate about aviation. On that fateful day, Foster was piloting a Piper PA 32-260, tail number N3705, on a flight from Yakutat to Anchorage's Merrill Field. The journey was part of a cross-country trip that began with the acquisition of the aircraft in Atlanta. After fueling in Yakutat, Foster contacted the Juneau Flight Service for updated weather conditions, indicating he might stop in Cordova if necessary. 18 minutes later, radar data showed a target near 100 feet over the Gulf of Alaska, but then both the aircraft and its pilot vanished from radar and radio contact. Some local fishermen later reported seeing an aircraft flying unusually low near the Malaspina Glacier on the afternoon of September 9, though they did not recognize it as Foster's plane at the time. The sighting added a tantalizing hint to the investigation, suggesting that the aircraft may have deviated from its planned flight path. The disappearance prompted an extensive search operation. The Alaska National Guard, Coast Guard, and other agencies mobilized to locate Foster and his aircraft. Despite their efforts, including shoreline searches and aerial sweeps, no wreckage was found. The only clue was a brief electronic ping detected near Mount Eberly, a 70-foot peak at the southern edge of the Malaspina Glacier. However, this signal was faint and could not be triangulated to a specific location. Investigators considered various possibilities. The weather conditions were challenging, with rain, 40-knot winds, and low visibility. Foster had been flying under visual flight rules, which require pilots to navigate using visual references rather than instruments. Such conditions could have disoriented even the most experienced pilot. Additionally, the rugged terrain of the Wrangell Street Elias National Park, with its glaciers and mountainous landscapes, posed significant challenges for both navigation and search operations. The lack of an emergency beacon on the aircraft further complicated the search. Without such a device, pinpointing the aircraft's location became nearly impossible. The electronic ping near Mount Eberly was the only potential lead, but it was too weak and brief to provide a definitive location. Authorities also reviewed Foster's flight logs and maintenance records, confirming that the aircraft had been thoroughly inspected before departure. No mechanical issues were noted, and Foster had conducted all standard pre-flight checks, making sudden equipment failure less likely. This fact deepened the mystery, as even an experienced pilot like Foster had vanished without warning or trace. As days turned into weeks and weeks into months, the search was scaled back. The absence of new leads and the vast, inhospitable terrain made continued efforts increasingly difficult. The case remained open, but without new information, it became one of Alaska's many unsolved aviation mysteries. Experts in aviation accidents speculated that microbursts or sudden wind shear near the coastline could have overwhelmed the aircraft in seconds, leaving little time for corrective action. The remote location and rapidly changing weather in southeastern Alaska makes such phenomena difficult to predict and nearly impossible to survive without immediate shelter or rescue. Foster's family and friends were left grappling with the uncertainty of his fate. His wife, Susan, and their 3 children, Nikita, Caitlin, and Eric, held on to the hope that he might still be found. They remembered him not just as a skilled pilot, but as a loving husband and father, someone who had dedicated his life to the skies and to his family. The disappearance of Alan Foster serves as a stark reminder of the challenges and dangers faced by pilots operating in Alaska's vast wilderness. Despite advancements in technology and search techniques, the state's rugged terrain continues to claim lives and keep secrets. Foster's case remains open, a testament to the mysteries that still lie hidden in the Alaskan wilderness. The Gulf of Alaska holds its secrets, and Alan Foster's fate remains one of them. Lost near Nenana, the vanishing of Frank Minano. The air in the Alaskan wilderness around Nenana carried a sharp, bitter chill even in late spring. Trees rose thick and dark along the riverbanks, their branches swaying with a quiet, almost deliberate rhythm. For decades, locals had respected these forests, knowing how quickly a day's hike could turn into a night of uncertainty. Frank Minano was no stranger to this world, a teacher, hunter, and mentor to those learning the skills of subsistence living. He understood the rhythms of the land better than most. Minano was last seen in March of 1997. Friends recall that he had set out on a short trek to check traps and gather firewood, a routine that he had followed for years. He carried only the essentials and moved with the calm assurance of someone who had spent a lifetime reading the land. His familiarity with the forests and rivers around Nenana gave neighbors a sense of security, which made his disappearance all the more alarming. The first hints that something was wrong came when Minano failed to return by nightfall. Those who knew him well expected him to appear, even after a long day, but hours passed with no sign. Concern grew steadily among his family and the small community. They reported him missing, and local search teams were quickly assembled. Snow had begun to melt in patches, and the ground was uneven, riddled with hidden ice and mud. Every footstep in such terrain could be treacherous, and the urgency of the search intensified with each passing hour. Searchers described the forest as both familiar and alien. Tracks crisscrossed the muddy banks of the Tanana River, some clearly made by animals, others possibly by Minano, but every lead faded quickly into the undergrowth. Local hunters reported seeing unusual animal behavior in the area around the time of his disappearance, with moose and wolves appearing in places they rarely ventured. Dogs trained to follow scents struggled, losing the trail after only a few hundred feet. Helicopters scanned from above, their spotlights cutting through the fading light, yet nothing stood out in the dense forest canopy. Despite repeated aerial surveys, even infrared scans failed to detect any heat signatures that could have indicated his presence. Even the river, a guiding feature for many explorers, offered no clues. Friends and neighbors who knew Nenana emphasized his cautious nature. He was careful to leave notes about his travels, tell someone his intended path, and prepare for sudden weather changes. None of these precautions explained why he had simply vanished. Nenana had recently shared plans to map a series of lesser-known trails near the river, a project he had undertaken to teach younger members of the community. His disappearance seemed to defy everything he had taught others about survival and awareness in the wilderness. People who had spent years learning from him could not reconcile his vanishing with his knowledge and experience. Investigators turned to patterns in previous disappearances in the area. Nenana and the surrounding valleys had long been known for their unpredictability, where sudden fogs, treacherous river currents, and dense forests could swallow even the most experienced outdoorsmen. Local authorities reviewed cases dating back decades, seeking connections or similarities that might provide insight. While a few past disappearances ended with bodies or belongings found, Nenana left behind nothing. No tracks beyond the starting point, no gear, no indication of direction or struggle. The community's search efforts stretched over days, combining local volunteers with state troopers and wildlife officers. Canoes navigated icy rivers while teams scanned on foot and from small aircraft. Families of missing individuals shared knowledge of the terrain, attempting to predict where someone could go and still survive. Each day, the hope of finding Nenana alive diminished, replaced by a growing fear that the wilderness had claimed him entirely. Nenana's disappearance left a lasting mark on those who knew him. Stories circulated about the places he had visited and the people he had taught, each memory tinged with a mixture of admiration and sorrow. His vanishing became a cautionary tale, reminding everyone that even those most skilled in the ways of the land were not immune to the dangers hidden within it. The forest continued to whisper around Nenana, indifferent to the search parties and the unanswered questions that hung in its shadows. Years later, the mystery of Frank Nenana's disappearance remains unsolved. The paths he once knew so well have shifted under seasons of snow and growth, and every expedition into the area is met with the same uncertain quiet. The forest seems unchanged, yet it holds a secret that refuses to reveal itself. No trace of Frank Nenana was ever found, leaving the wilderness to keep its silence. The veteran who walked into thin air, Leonard Lane. The streets of Fairbanks buzzed with quiet excitement on the morning of July 4, 1983. The Independence Day parade drew families, veterans, and local officials to the town square, a temporary festival of flags, music, and waving hands. Among the crowd stood Leonard Lane, a decorated World War II veteran, recognizable by the rows of ribbons pinned to his jacket and the calm posture of someone who had faced danger far beyond parades and celebrations. Onlookers noted how he seemed absorbed in the march itself, scanning the cheering faces with the attentiveness of a soldier surveying unfamiliar terrain. Lane had returned to Fairbanks after years in the military, choosing a life marked by quiet routines and community involvement. He frequently volunteered at the local Veterans Center, helping other former soldiers navigate the complexities of civilian life. Neighbors remembered his regular morning walks along familiar streets, where he would nod to acquaintances and stop to chat briefly. That day, he had decided to enjoy the parade before continuing on one of these habitual walks, a plan that would never reach its intended conclusion. Witnesses last saw him near the intersection of Cushman Street and First Avenue. He appeared to step off the parade route briefly, blending into the side streets that threaded through the city center. People nearby assumed he would return in a moment, a small detour before continuing his familiar stroll. Moments passed, and he did not reappear. A local shopkeeper later recalled seeing Lane pause to watch a street musician before stepping out of view. suggesting he may have been momentarily distracted. Initially, the crowd paid little attention, thinking he had merely wandered slightly out of sight, but when the parade ended, concern began to grow. The first calls to the Fairbanks Police Department described a man who had simply vanished from a well-populated street. Officers retraced the parade route, checked side alleys, and questioned merchants along the way. Despite interviews and canvassing, no sign of Lane was found. Cameras mounted along the main street offered little help, providing only fleeting images of him turning a corner, the footage ending abruptly, as if he had stepped out of the frame and into nothing. Neighbors spoke of the uncanny familiarity he had with his surroundings, how Lane knew the back streets and parks of Fairbanks like the back of his hand. It seemed impossible that someone so rooted in the community could disappear without leaving a trace. Some recalled that he had recently discussed exploring a small wooded area near the Chena River, a quiet spot he had walked countless times, yet there was no evidence that he had gone there that day. A range of scenarios was considered by the investigators. A sudden medical event, an accidental fall, or disorientation were possibilities given his age and health, but search teams found no body, no belongings, and no signs of struggle. Even K9 units failed to detect his scent beyond the immediate streets. Volunteers searching nearby alleys reported finding a single, unexplained footprint in soft dirt, which did not match Lane's shoes or any known passerby. Lane's disappearance remained confined to the public areas he had walked, a disappearance that seemed impossible under the watch of dozens of witnesses. Local historians noted that Fairbanks had occasional cases of unexplained vanishings, often linked to the surrounding forests or the icy rivers, but Lane's case stood apart. He did not live near wilderness edges that day, nor had he ventured into remote trails. The city itself, with its clear streets and regular foot traffic, had swallowed him whole. His disappearance challenged every conventional explanation, from accidents to voluntary disappearance, leaving officials grasping for answers that never came. Loved ones clung to memories of him, increasingly unsettled. Letters, phone calls, and personal visits offered no clues. Each inquiry ended in frustration. Lane's home remained undisturbed, his routines seemingly paused mid-action. People recounted his meticulous habits, the care he took in arranging personal items, and his tendency to inform someone before leaving the house. The absence of such a note or explanation deepened the mystery, making it clear that his vanishing was neither careless nor planned. With each passing year, Lane's disappearance kept haunting Fairbanks. Annual parades came and went, and locals occasionally paused at the corners where he had last been seen. Conversations about the veteran who walked into thin air persisted, drawing interest from investigators, journalists, and the community alike. Some claimed to see a fleeting figure among the streets, a silhouette reminiscent of Lane, but nothing concrete emerged to solve the puzzle. No explanation has ever been found for Leonard Lane, leaving a city's streets to hold the silence of a man who disappeared in plain sight. The nurse who went missing in Anchorage, Thomas Anthony Newsy. Anchorage's streets were slick with spring rain the night Thomas Anthony Newsy disappeared. Streetlights reflected off wet pavement, giving familiar roads a strange, almost distorted glow. People hurried along sidewalks, umbrellas in hand, while the occasional car cut through puddles with soft splashes. Newsy, a travelling nurse known for his calm demeanour and precise routines, had just finished a shift at Providence Hospital. He left work like any other night, blending into the flow of pedestrians, yet he would not be seen again. Colleagues remembered him as diligent and careful, someone who rarely deviated from his daily patterns. He often walked the same routes to his temporary lodgings, checking in with friends along the way. That evening, he stopped at a small convenience store, purchasing water and a snack. A clerk recalled him smiling politely, exchanging a few words, and leaving without hurry. This ordinary interaction would become one of the last confirmed sightings of Nuzzy. Neighbours along his route reported hearing the faint sound of footsteps echoing through narrow alleyways, yet no one recalled seeing him enter any side street or building. Some later described a fleeting shadow near a lamppost that did not match any passerby. Local witnesses later mentioned seeing Newsy pause near a small park bench, tucked between two apartment buildings. He appeared to be looking at something across the street, though no one could identify what caught his attention. Moments later, he continued walking, fading into the shadows of the rainy streets. The rain washed away most traces, and by morning, even the smallest clue seemed gone. For investigators, the city streets themselves became both the setting and the barrier, concealing Nuzzi from view in plain sight. Anchorage police launched an immediate search, canvassing the areas he was known to frequent. Officers interviewed friends, co-workers, and local business owners. Surveillance cameras captured fragments of movement, but nothing definitive. Footage showed Nuzzi crossing streets and walking past lit storefronts, yet the trail ended abruptly. No vehicle, no alternate route, no witness could account for his sudden disappearance. The weather may have played a role, though not in obvious ways. Heavy rainfall created reflections and shadows that distorted vision, and puddles masked tracks that might have revealed a path. Investigators considered whether he might have slipped near a curb or entered an alley unnoticed, yet searches revealed nothing. Dogs trained in tracking scents were unable to maintain a trail beyond a few blocks. Investigators also reviewed traffic patterns and bus schedules, considering whether he might have inadvertently boarded a vehicle or been misdirected in the wet and dim conditions. Yet no records, ticket purchases, or eyewitness accounts confirmed any such movement. The absence of evidence only deepened the uncertainty surrounding his disappearance, leaving the case wide open. Every lead dissolved into the wet cityscape, as though the streets themselves had absorbed him. Those closest to him wrestled with questions that had no clear answers. Nuzzi had been methodical and conscientious, leaving nothing undone in his personal or professional life. His wallet, keys, and personal effects remained untouched at his lodging. The disappearance was not only sudden, but contrary to every habit he had cultivated. Those who knew him described the situation as impossible to comprehend, a vanishing that defied ordinary logic. Past records indicate that disappearances in Anchorage often occur near remote paths, rivers, or risky areas. Nuzzi's case differed because it occurred in a dense urban environment. It was unusual for someone to vanish without trace in a populated area with witnesses, cameras, and routine foot traffic. This distinction made the case especially baffling to both investigators and residents. Weeks passed with no resolution. Volunteers and police alike retraced Nuzzi's known paths repeatedly, hoping to find a clue overlooked in the chaos of that rainy night. Yet the search returned only dead ends and fleeting impressions. Conversations in the neighborhood spoke of a quiet anxiety, a recognition that someone could disappear even amid the familiar hum of daily life. The city adapted, but the absence of Thomas Anthony Nuzzi lingered. His colleagues returned to their routines, yet the memory of his disappearance remained present, a silent question mark in their minds. Families and friends continued to wonder if a single, unnoticed action or misstep had led him into something untraceable, something beyond reach. Nobody knows what happened to Thomas Anthony Nuzzi, leaving the streets of Anchorage to hold the secret of a nurse who vanished without warning. The Fairbanks disappearance, Shanna Oman. The late afternoon sun in Fairbanks cast long shadows across quiet streets, giving the neighborhood an almost surreal stillness. Children played in backyards, and a few cars moved slowly along familiar roads. Shanna Oman had decided to take a short walk near her home, a route she had followed countless times. Neighbors remembered seeing her leave, her pace casual, as though she had nowhere urgent to be. Yet that walk would become the last confirmed sighting of her. Oman had recently moved to Fairbanks and was known for her friendly, approachable nature. Friends described her as cautious but adventurous, often exploring the local trails and parks. She had spoken about enjoying the quiet streets and the natural beauty of the surrounding area. Her disappearance came without warning, leaving loved ones struggling to understand how a familiar route could turn into a vanishing point. Witnesses reported seeing Oman walking past a cluster of houses near the edge of a small park. Some remembered her pausing briefly, appearing to glance at something across the street, though no one could identify what had caught her attention. A local jogger reported seeing Oman pause near the entrance to a narrow alley she rarely used, appearing to look over her shoulder as if she had noticed someone or something behind her. According to the observer, she hesitated in her steps, but by the time they reached the spot, she had walked on and disappeared from view. Moments later, she continued along her path and seemingly melted into the environment. People nearby assumed she would reach her destination shortly, never imagining she might disappear entirely. Fairbanks police received the first missing person report later that evening. Officers immediately began canvassing the area, checking homes, yards, and alleyways along her usual route. They interviewed neighbors and reviewed any available surveillance footage, but nothing revealed a clear clue. There were no signs of a struggle, no dropped belongings, and no tracks leading away from the immediate area. Oman seemed to have vanished into thin air. Search teams extended their efforts to nearby parks, small wooded areas, and walking trails. Volunteers and police walked systematically, calling out her name and scanning every corner. K9 units were brought in to follow potential scents, yet every trail ended abruptly. Investigators later checked the nearby drainage canals and underpasses, areas that were often overlooked in initial searches. Nothing was found, yet the thorough examination highlighted just how quickly and completely someone could vanish in a seemingly ordinary neighborhood. This reinforced the mystery and left authorities with few options for moving the case forward. Investigators considered every possibility, from accidental injury to voluntary disappearance, but each scenario led to more questions than answers. Family members recalled her meticulous routines. She always carried her keys and phone and informed someone when stepping out for a walk. Her disappearance contradicted the habits she had followed for months. Friends noted that she had no known conflicts or reasons to disappear, making the sudden vanishing all the more perplexing. Each day without news deepened the uncertainty and the community's concern. Historical context added another layer of mystery. Fairbanks had experienced other unexplained disappearances, often linked to the dense forests and harsh terrain surrounding the city. Still, Oman's case was unusual because it happened so close to residential streets and during daylight hours. The absence of physical evidence made it difficult to connect her disappearance to the broader pattern, leaving investigators without a clear starting point. Local residents recounted seeing search parties combing the streets in the days following her disappearance. Helicopters flew overhead, scanning rooftops and tree lines, while volunteers checked nearby riverbanks and wooded patches. Despite these efforts, nothing emerged to indicate her whereabouts. The community grew uneasy, aware that someone could simply vanish even in a familiar, populated area. Psychologists and law enforcement officials discussed the challenges of such urban disappearances. They noted that even small environmental factors, a momentary distraction, a misstep on uneven ground, or an unnoticed alleyway, could make a person vanish without leaving a trace. In Oman's case, no clues pointed definitively to any of these possibilities, leaving the mystery unresolved. Months turned into years, and Shana Oman's disappearance remained unsolved. Streets she once walked became markers of a puzzle that no one could complete. Friends and neighbors continued to talk about her in hushed tones, recounting the last moments she was seen and the eerie lack of any explanation. Shana Oman disappeared so completely that even the paths she once traveled seemed to hold their silence. The marathon runner who was never found, Paul Michael Lemaitre. The trail wound through the Chugach Mountains like a ribbon of shadow and light. Pine trees swayed gently in the morning breeze, their needles rustling softly. The scent of wet earth and distant streams hung in the air, mingling with the faint tang of sweat from the runners ahead. Spectators lined portions of the course, their voices carrying briefly before fading into the dense forest. Paul Michael Lemaitre moved steadily along the path, his stride confident, blending rhythm and effort in a way only a seasoned marathoner could. Other runners noted his presence almost instinctively. They saw him weaving through the pack with effortless focus, his posture composed, breathing even. To them, Lemaitre embodied experience, someone who had run these distances countless times and knew the mountains better than most. In passing, a fellow runner remarked on the quiet intensity of his gaze, the sense that he was attuned to something only he could see along the trail. The terrain shifted suddenly. Rocky outcrops, hidden gullies, and dense undergrowth forced runners to adjust constantly. Streams trickled across narrow paths, reflecting the sun in glittering patterns that could distract the unwary. Each step required attention, yet the forest itself seemed to move in imperceptible ways, the wind bending branches, shadows stretching unexpectedly. It was easy for even the most skilled runners to lose a sense of continuity in the trail. Mist began to rise from small creek beds, curling around roots and rocks. Sunlight fractured through the treetops, casting shifting patterns on the path. Every step created faint echoes, yet they seemed swallowed immediately by the forest. The wind carried the distant murmur of runners behind him, but the deeper parts of the trail felt isolated, almost as if the mountains themselves were holding their breath. A few minutes later, Lemaitre's movements drew attention in a strange way. He slowed briefly, his eyes scanning a curve in the path ahead. Some nearby runners noticed him glance toward a cluster of trees where the sunlight broke in odd patterns, though no object or person was visible. Then, almost imperceptibly, he continued forward, his rhythm intact, and within moments, he seemed to vanish from sight. The runners who followed the trail expected to see him reappear, yet the path offered no trace of him, no sign of pause or stumble. Trailing runners slowed, scanning the trail ahead and calling his name. Some felt a chill, a sudden awareness of how vast the mountains could be even during daylight. Others recalled how he had often led the pack in practice runs, always alert to uneven ground or hidden obstacles. Now even his familiar confidence seemed to vanish with him. Race officials attempted to reconstruct his final steps. Volunteers retraced the last segment of the trail, examining the ground for footprints or scuff marks. Helicopters and drones scanned from above, but the dense canopy made aerial searches difficult. Dogs were brought in, noses low to the ground, yet even trained trackers lost the scent after a short distance. Creeks, gullies, and overhanging rocks were examined repeatedly. Each nook and cranny was scrutinized, and every rock turned, yet nothing suggested he had gone off the trail. The forest had erased every sign of him. People who knew Lemaitre reflected on the way he combined sharp skill with thoughtful caution. He ran with meticulous preparation, knowing the mountain's hidden dangers. He carried water and basic supplies, and had trained for every segment of the trail. The thought that he could disappear despite such precautions was almost impossible to accept. Memories of his laughter, his encouragement to fellow runners, and the determination in his eyes clashed with the absence that followed. The marathon community still talks about him in hushed tones. The forested paths and winding trails where he vanished have become a quiet reminder of the unpredictable power of nature. Even runners familiar with the Chugach Mountains, who knew every rock and stream, acknowledged that no one could explain what happened. The trails seem unchanged, yet the memory of Lemaitre's disappearance lingers like a shadow across the course. In the years that followed, the people who frequent these trails remember that day in their own way. Some describe sudden shivers when crossing the curve where he was last seen. Others recall the strange play of sunlight and shadow that morning, almost as if the forest itself was watching. His absence remains as palpable as the chill wind along the ridge, a haunting silence in the mountains he knew so well. Paul Michael Lemaitre vanished so completely that even the finish line could not claim him. The Anchorage Trail's mystery. Jael Tiara Hamblin. The trails near Anchorage were quiet that morning, wrapped in a thick, low-hanging fog. The spruce and birch swayed gently in the breeze, releasing the sharp scent of pine into the crisp air. Small streams whispered over rocks, their soft murmur blending with distant bird calls. The mist softened edges and shapes, turning familiar landmarks into ghostly silhouettes. Jael Tiara Hamblin parked her car at the trailhead and adjusted her backpack, checking that her boots were secure. This was a path she knew well, one she had walked countless times, yet the forest that day seemed unusually still, almost watching. As she stepped onto the trail, Hamblin's movements were careful and deliberate. She had always been cautious, pausing occasionally to observe her surroundings or listen for wildlife. A hiker, trailing behind, noticed her glance toward a bend in the path where shadows lay thick. as if she had sensed something that did not belong. The observer could not see what she saw, only that she hesitated, shifted her weight, and continued forward. There was nothing overtly alarming, but the pause lingered in memory. The trail Hamblin was walking had recently suffered minor erosion after heavy rains, creating loose soil and hidden holes near the usual path. A fallen tree partially blocked a small side route, and a washed-out bridge over a creek had been marked by caution tape earlier in the week. These small but real changes to familiar terrain meant that even an experienced hiker like Hamblin could encounter unexpected obstacles. The fog thickened as she moved deeper into the forest. Light fractured through the trees in shifting patterns, creating a surreal mosaic of shadow and sun on the path. The faint rustle of leaves and a distant snapping branch made the trail feel larger, stranger, and harder to navigate than usual. Hamblin's steady rhythm contrasted with the forest's unpredictable movements, yet even her familiarity with the area offered no protection from its disorienting effect. Several hikers later reported seeing Hamblin standing near a small clearing where a fallen log had created an unusual gap in the trees. She appeared to look back over her shoulder, though no one was nearby. One witness recalled that she adjusted her jacket and seemed to hesitate longer than normal before continuing along the trail, a subtle behavior that suggested she had noticed something unusual. Observers at the trailhead soon noticed that Hamblin had not returned after a routine period. Her car remained where she had left it, but she was nowhere to be seen. Volunteers organized themselves quickly, fanning out along the trail, calling her name and shining flashlights through the thickening fog. The forest responded only with silence, broken intermittently by the faint sound of a creek or the occasional call of a distant bird. Each section of the trail revealed no footprints or evidence of passage, no items left behind to mark her route. Searchers described the terrain as deceptive. Trails forked unexpectedly, dipped into shallow gullies, and were often hidden by undergrowth. Even those who knew the area intimately found themselves disoriented. The mist, combined with the dense canopy overhead, limited visibility to mere feet in some areas. Canine units were brought in, but every scent trail disappeared into the damp soil, leaving nothing for the dogs to follow. What had seemed a familiar, manageable hike turned into a puzzle without edges or solutions. Family and friends of Hamblin were interviewed by investigators, who found no reason to suspect she had planned to leave or encounter harm. She was careful, alert, and experienced in outdoor environments. Her habits, precautions, and knowledge of the terrain made her disappearance all the more baffling. Those who knew her struggled to reconcile her disappearance with the competence she had always shown on similar trails. The community grew increasingly concerned as hours stretched into days. Neighbors, hikers, and local search and rescue volunteers revisited the trails, scouring every nook and cranny. Creek beds, overhanging rocks, and hidden side paths were examined repeatedly. Yet no trace of Hamblin emerged. Small personal effects, footprints, or even subtle signs of her passing were absent, leaving investigators with a sense of frustration and unease. Years later, hikers still speak quietly of the day Jael Tiara Hamblin disappeared. The trail remains unchanged, but those who traverse it feel a lingering tension, a subtle reminder that someone can vanish without a trace even in familiar surroundings. Every bend, shadowed fork, and whispering stream carries the memory of an unresolved absence, a question left unanswered by the forest she once knew so well. Jael Tiara Hamblin walked into the mist and was never seen again. The Cessna that never landed, 1986. The early morning sky over the Alaska Triangle was a deep shade of grey, thick with clouds that promised snow. The wind cut across the runway at Merrill Field in Anchorage, rattling the hangar doors and scattering loose papers across the tarmac. Inside the small terminal, the pilot of the Cessna 182, a local man named Robert K. Thompson, performed his pre-flight inspection with methodical precision. The plane carried him, along with 2 passengers, on a short flight intended to reach a remote cabin near the Talkeetna Mountains. It was a routine trip, one they had all made before, yet the weather hinted at an unpredictable journey. As the aircraft lifted from the runway, witnesses outside the terminal noted the low hum of the engine, fading as the plane climbed into the overcast sky. Thompson maintained radio contact with the control tower, reporting altitude and heading in his calm, practiced tone. Everything appeared normal, yet some observers later recalled a sudden flicker of something unusual, a brief dip in the plane's path as it passed over a ridge. No alarm sounded, and the aircraft continued, but that fleeting moment would later haunt those involved in the investigation. The Cessna vanished from radar screens sooner than expected. Anchorage air traffic controllers noted the signal weakening, then disappearing entirely over a sparsely populated stretch of forest. Search parties mobilized quickly, aware of the dangers of the region. The Talkeetna Mountains were notorious for sudden weather changes, with narrow valleys, jagged peaks, and thick forests that could conceal almost anything. Helicopters and small planes scoured the area, while ground teams followed access roads and trails, hoping to find some sign of the aircraft. Days passed without evidence. Investigators examined Thompson's flight plan, his experience, and the known weather reports. Nothing explained why the aircraft had disappeared without leaving a trace. The passengers, both experienced hikers familiar with the wilderness, were accounted for in planning, and no distress calls were recorded. Searchers found only dense trees, rocky outcroppings, and frozen streams that stretched for miles. The mountains had swallowed all evidence, leaving the Cessna and its occupants as if they had evaporated into the sky. Memories of the passengers remained sharp for family and friends. Each had distinct personalities and backgrounds, yet all shared a love for the Alaskan wilderness. Thompson, known for his careful attention to detail, had been meticulous in preparing the plane. The passengers had packed lightly, intending a short stay. It was this ordinary, almost mundane routine that made the disappearance so difficult to comprehend. Those who knew them struggled with the reality that skilled, cautious individuals could vanish entirely in familiar territory. Though scarce, witness statements were compelling. A small number of hikers and pilots later recounted seeing the plane in the distance at unusual angles, appearing to wobble or drift off course. Others reported hearing faint engine noises in areas where the plane should not have been. Each account was inconsistent, fleeting, and often contradictory. Yet collectively, they painted a picture of a flight that defied expectation, where ordinary procedures and careful planning seemed suddenly irrelevant. Flight logs, maintenance records, and weather reports were thoroughly combed through by investigators. The Cessna had no mechanical faults reported, and the aircraft was well maintained. Radar coverage was limited in the remote mountain valleys, but even so, there was no trace beyond the brief initial flight path. Ground and aerial searches continued for weeks, yet every effort returned the same result: nothing. It was as though the plane had disappeared from both the physical and electronic world simultaneously. Local pilots and search teams reflected on the hazards of the region. Avalanches, sudden whiteouts, and turbulence could make even routine flights perilous. Yet none of these explanations fully accounted for the lack of wreckage or debris. Trees, snow, and rocky terrain often left fragments behind. Yet in this case, the mountains appeared to have absorbed everything. Each day of fruitless searching only deepened the mystery, leaving investigators with more questions than answers. Even after all these years, the disappearance has never been solved. The Talkeetna Mountains have been searched repeatedly, using modern technology, drones, and thermal imaging. Nothing has surfaced to clarify the fate of Thompson or his passengers. Families continue to honor their memory, leaving personal items at trailheads and hangars, hoping for closure that may never come. The story of the Cessna that never landed continues to echo through the Alaskan wilderness, a stark reminder of the unpredictability and immense power of the Triangle. The Cessna vanished without a trace, leaving only the wind and the mountains as silent witnesses. The vanishing in Denali National Park. Denali National Park stretches across nearly 6 million acres of raw, untamed wilderness. Towering peaks, glaciers, and vast tundra dominate the landscape, creating a place both breathtaking and unforgiving. In the summer months, the park draws hikers and explorers eager to witness its natural beauty. Yet even experienced adventurers sometimes underestimate the scale and difficulty of the terrain. It was into this immense expanse that a hiker named Michael Reynolds set out one July morning, unaware that his journey would end in mystery. Reynolds was an experienced outdoorsman, familiar with harsh conditions and long treks. He had mapped his route carefully, packing essential supplies, navigation tools, and emergency equipment. Colleagues at his lodge in Healy noted his meticulous preparation and confidence. Friends described him as cautious yet adventurous, someone who respected nature but enjoyed challenging himself. His disappearance would shock those who knew him, because he was the last person anyone would expect to vanish so completely. The last confirmed sighting of Reynolds occurred near the Teklanika River, a fast-flowing waterway known for sudden surges and hidden currents. A park ranger on routine patrol remembered seeing him cross a shallow section, appearing to move steadily and confidently. The weather was calm, though clouds gathered on distant peaks. No unusual sounds or movements were reported, nothing to indicate that danger was near. Reynolds continued past the ranger's view, and after that moment, he seemed to disappear into the vast wilderness. Search efforts began immediately once Reynolds was reported missing. Rangers organized teams to cover rivers, trails, and ridges, while aerial searches attempted to locate any sign from above. Volunteers and family members joined, combing every likely path. Canine units were deployed to follow scents, yet the dogs could not track him beyond a certain point. Investigators noted that the landscape itself posed a challenge. Dense spruce forests, uneven terrain, and shifting riverbanks complicated every search. Clues were maddeningly few. No personal items, footprints, or camp remnants were found along the expected route. The Teklanika River had hidden tracks beneath sandbars, and snowmelt further washed away any possible signs. Rangers speculated that Reynolds might have continued off-trail, but the park's vastness made it nearly impossible to search every nook and hollow. Days of extensive searching produced nothing conclusive, leaving only unanswered questions. Experienced individuals in Denali often emphasize the park's inherent risks. Even well-prepared individuals could fall victim to hidden crevices, sudden wildlife encounters, or rapid weather changes. Avalanches and flash floods were known hazards, as were disorienting fogs that could cause a person to lose their sense of direction. For Reynolds, a misstep in an otherwise routine section could have meant being swept into an inaccessible area. Yet without any trace, investigators struggled to pinpoint what might have happened. Few came forward, but their accounts were puzzling. A solo hiker later reported seeing a figure in the distance moving along a ridge, only to find the area empty upon closer inspection. Another visitor claimed to hear a faint shout across a valley, but could not locate the source. While these observations were never verified, they added a layer of uncertainty and tension to the investigation, suggesting Reynolds might have been somewhere in the park beyond the reach of search teams. In response to the incident, Denali authorities reassessed safety measures and surveillance practices. Rangers emphasized the importance of letting others know detailed travel plans, using satellite communication devices, and understanding local river and terrain hazards. Even so, no protocol could account for the sheer scale of the park or the ways in which a person could vanish within it. Reynolds' case became one of the most baffling in the park's recent history, a reminder of nature's indifference to even the most careful preparation. Over time, the area around the Teklanika River and nearby ridges became a place of quiet caution for hikers. Trails remained open, but many visitors approached them with heightened awareness, aware that even a familiar path could conceal hidden dangers. Stories of Reynolds' disappearance circulated among local guides and park staff, reinforcing a sense of respect for the wilderness. His absence left a lingering question in the minds of those who ventured into Denali. How could someone vanish in a place so well known and yet remain unseen? Michael Reynolds walked into Denali National Park and was never seen again.